the quiet one. The woman who carried bandages instead of bullets, who whispered prayers over the wounded while artillery lit up the night sky. No one knew what she was capable of. Not even the men she served beside. Not until the day 8 enemy marksmen surrounded their position. And she picked up a rifle, like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more stories. Her name was Lieutenant Aria Hayes, 29 years old, soft-spoken, a steady, almost fragile presence on the battlefield. She had joined the army to save lives, not to take them. Everyone remembered her as the medic who stayed awake after every firefight, sitting beside the injured long after others slept. She carried morphine, not magazines. Tourniquets, not tripods. And no one ever dared imagine her with a sniper scope pressed against her cheek. But war doesn't care about who you believe you are. War shows you who you must become. The morning it happened, the fog was so thick the ground seemed to swallow sound. The base was quiet. Too quiet, the kind that makes trained soldiers glance at each other without speaking. Aria was preparing supplies inside the field tent. The smell of antiseptic mixed with gun oil. The faint buzz of a generator hummed behind her. She tied her hair back, the way she always did before another day of treating the broken. Then, a single gunshot cracked the silence. Then another. Then a scream. Aria dropped everything. She burst out of the tent and froze. The outpost was pinned. Her unit, the very men she had patched up and prayed for, were trapped behind sandbags as enemy fire rained from the surrounding ridge. These weren't random shooters. They were coordinated, camouflaged, patient, snipers, and they had the high ground. Aria felt her pulse slow, not race, slow. That calm, unnatural calm she'd only felt once before, years ago, when she watched a friend bleed out in her arms. She scanned the ridge with her eyes alone, no optics, and saw them. Slight flickers of barrel shine, movement in the brush, 8 positions, 8 rifles trained on her people. The commander shouted for smoke cover, but the launchers were out. The unit was trapped. Someone yelled to Aria to get back in the tent. But she didn't. She walked, slow, deliberate, toward the weapon rack. Her hand didn't go to the medical bag. It went to the long, black precision rifle no one had ever seen her touch. And when she turned around, every man there realized something about her was not what it seemed. The rifle felt heavier than anyone expected, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. The long black M110 marksman rifle had been issued to the platoon sniper, Corporal Rivas. He was the best shot in the unit. Everyone knew it. Everyone relied on him. But Rivas now lay face down behind a concrete barrier, blood seeping from under his vest, a silent testament to how quickly the ridge had been taken. Aria knelt beside him. The battle around her blurred into muffled echoes. Gunfire reduced to distant thunder. She pressed 2 fingers to his carotid. Nothing. The medic in her wanted to stay, to close his eyes, to say the quiet words she always said for the fallen. But the soldier inside her, the one most had never seen, stood up instead. Her hands worked with quiet precision. She checked the bolt, the scope alignment, wind direction, elevation. Things she should not have known. Things she had not been trained for, at least not officially. And that was when Sergeant Hale, dust-coated and desperate, grabbed her arm. "What are you doing? That's Rivas's weapon! Aria, put it down! We need you on the wounded!" She didn't even look at him. "There won't be any wounded left if those shooters keep their sight lines." Hale froze, because she was right. Someone fired toward them. A shard of concrete struck Hale's boot. He ducked back behind the barrier. Aria did not flinch. She moved forward, not chaotic, not frantic, just focused, like someone who had been waiting for this moment. But no one knew her story. No one knew that before she became a medic, she used to spend every autumn morning on her grandfather's farm, lying in tall grass, learning how to breathe so steady that even her heartbeat felt quiet. No one knew that before she wore army green, she spent half her childhood tracking deer through misty timberlands, learning patience longer than daylight. She had never called herself a sniper. She had simply always known how to see. Now, she climbed the ladder to the lookout platform, every step measured, every sound drowned beneath rising gunfire. The camera, if it were here, would track behind her shoulder, rain starting to fall, dust mixing into mud, bullet impacts punching splinters from the wood near her boots. At the top, she lay prone, body flat, breath slow, cheek pressed to stock. She adjusted the scope, and for the first time, the enemy on the ridge came into crystal, undeniable clarity. 8 of them, well dug in, well trained, well hidden, and she whispered, not a prayer, not a promise, just a single breath. Okay? Her finger moved to the trigger. The first target was barely more than a silhouette, a faint distortion of leaves where a human head shouldn't it be. Most soldiers would have needed time to confirm, to adjust, to steady their nerves. But Arya didn't hesitate. Her breathing slowed until it felt like the world exhaled with her. The crosshairs settled. The rifle bucked. A single shot cracked through the valley. 1. The ridge shifted. Branches stirred, shapes dipped lower, gunfire paused just long enough to feel unnatural. The enemy didn't know what had happened. Not yet. Distance and silence can confuse even the confident. But Arya already had the next target lined up, 2. Her unit below hadn't even processed what she was doing. Sergeant Hale peeked around the concrete edge, eyes narrowed, expression shifting from disbelief to something close to awe. The men had seen trained snipers miss under stress. They'd seen soldiers freeze when it mattered most. But Arya wasn't freezing. She wasn't scrambling. She was calm. The kind of calm that makes the world feel smaller, tighter, quiet. Rain began to fall harder now, not heavy, but steady, streaking the metal of her rifle and darkening her sleeves. The ridge grew hazier. This was the kind of weather that killed accuracy, where moisture bent light and muddied visibility. But Arya didn't rely on visibility. She relied on movement. The third enemy shifted to change his firing angle, just a blur of fabric across a branch cluster, and Arya fired before the form was fully defined in her scope. 3. Down below, someone whispered, "How is she doing that?" No one answered. The 4th shot was harder. The target had crawled behind a fallen tree, only a sliver of helmet visible. Arya waited. 10 seconds. 13. 20. The battlefield noise dimmed. A single droplet slid from the tip of her nose onto the rifle's cheek weld. She blinked once, then fired. 4. Only now did the enemy realize something was terribly wrong. Their shots grew frantic, erratic, no longer calculated. They were searching for the unseen ghost, killing them one by one. A phantom in the rain. Arya shifted position, just a few inches, enough to break any predictable counter sightline. The camera would show her boots digging into wet wood, her jaw locked, her eyes unblinking through the scope's glass. She moved to target 5, but this one was different. This one wasn't aiming at her unit. He was aiming at her. His scope glinted against the stormlight, the brief, unmistakable signal of a sniper aiming back. Her pulse didn't spike. Her hands didn't shake. She simply exhaled, long, slow, steady, and pulled the trigger. 5. The shot echoed through the valley like a verdict. But with every kill, the ridge grew angrier, and the remaining shooters were closing in. The remaining snipers were no longer firing. That was the first sign of trouble. When trained marksmen go silent, it means they're repositioning, flanking, tightening the circle. Arya knew it instantly. She had seen wolves do the same thing in the woods back home. A quiet shift before the real strike. The battlefield held its breath. The rain softened into a misty veil, turning the valley into a gray, blurred canvas of shapes and outlines. Below her, the men were still pinned down, still unsure whether to move or hold position. Hale called up to her, not a shout, just loud enough to carry over the rain. "Arya, talk to me!" But she couldn't talk. Words required breath, breath required time, and time was something they didn't have. She adjusted her scope just enough to widen her field of view. The ridge was alive with ghost movements now. Brush shifting, rocks dislodged, a faint shadow sliding behind a stump. The enemy had discipline, that much was clear. They weren't panicking, they were adapting, and they were hunting her. Arya's heartbeat slowed again. Not calm, not peace. Something deeper, something older. A survival instinct sharpened by memory. She remembered her grandfather telling her once, while the two of them lay on their stomachs beside a frost-covered tree line. A rifle is only half the weapon. The mind is the other half. If your mind breaks, the bullet doesn't matter. Her mind did not break. The sixth target appeared in the scope, but not stationary. He was sprinting, crossing a clearing to try and change levels. It was a bad move. Rushed, fear-driven. Arya fired while he was in full stride. 6. The seventh was smarter. He crawled low, using fallen branches and rock indentations to mask his silhouette. Arya tracked him, but the angle was wrong. A bad pull here could ricochet or hit a non-lethal point. She waited. Rain dripped into her eye. She blinked it away. Just then the sniper paused to adjust his rifle strap. 7. The ridge went still. A heavy quiet, the kind that weighs on the lungs. Only one remained now, and the last one was the real danger. Because the last one hadn't fired a single shot since the engagement began, which meant he wasn't a shooter. He was a spotter, the mind behind all of this. A strategist, someone who didn't panic, someone who didn't rush, someone who was watching her just as much as she was watching him. Arya scanned the tree line, searching for a sign, the faintest reflection, the slightest shift. Nothing. Then, a single shot ripped the wood post inches from her cheek. The last sniper had her zeroed, and he wasn't missing again. Wood splintered beside her face, scattering dust and rainwater across her cheek. Arya didn't move. Movement was exactly what the last sniper wanted. He had a perfect angle, one that didn't expose him directly. He'd chosen terrain that broke his outline and swallowed him into the forest. He was disciplined, patient, dangerous. This wasn't a marksman. This was someone who studied people like Arya, someone who waited for a reaction. She didn't give him one. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, not to block fear, but to listen. The rain dripped in steady rhythm off metal. The wind brushed across the upper branches of the pine, and beneath it, faint, almost lost in the valley's breath, she heard the soft crack of shifting gravel. Left side, higher elevation, near the ridge crest. She opened her eyes, slow, deliberate, and shifted the scope only an inch. But the sniper was already moving. He had anticipated her anticipation. A duel now, not of bullets, but of patience. Below, Sergeant Hale shouted again, but his voice came like something underwater, distant, muffled, unimportant. The world had narrowed to 2 rifles, 2 minds, and a valley of silence between them. Arya's breath slowed again, but this time it wasn't steady. It was controlled grief. Because for the first time, a face surfaced in her memory. Corporal Rivas. The man who used to sit across from her during rations, who once told her he liked that she didn't talk much. "You listen more than the rest of us," he'd said. "The world's loud. Good to have someone who listens." He had been the sniper, she had been the medic, and now she was both because he was gone. Her jaw tightened. The enemy sniper fired again. The round tore through the wood inches from her scope. Too close. He was bracketing her, zeroing her. One more correction and she would no longer be breathing. Arya placed her cheek firmly against the stock, and she waited. Seconds stretched. Rain softened the world into a gray wash. Then she saw it. Not his face, not his rifle, a breath, the faint expansion of leaves where his shoulder pressed against a branch. Arya didn't think. She knew. Her shot cracked like lightning-splitting stone. Silence. Total. The rain was the only sound left alive on the ridge. There were no more muzzle flashes, no more shifting shadows, no more hunt. 8 targets in 12 minutes. The valley stood still around her. Soldiers below slowly rose from cover, disbelief written across dirt-stained faces. But Arya didn't look at them. She looked at the ridge, a battlefield she had never wanted, and felt something inside her quietly break. Because in saving them, she had crossed a line she could never step back from. The ridge was quiet now. Too quiet. As Arya descended the lookout platform, the world around her seemed slower, heavier, as if gravity itself had thickened. The rain had settled into a steady, cool drizzle, beating on her uniform and streaking gray lines down her face. To the others, it might have looked like sweat or tears, but no one could tell which. The men emerged from cover one by one, their movements cautious, uncertain. Not because they were afraid of the enemy anymore, but because they were looking at her. The medic they thought they knew had just done something none of them could have imagined. 8 shots, 8 bodies, 12 minutes, and not just hitting targets, but reading them, outthinking them, outweighting them. That wasn't luck. That was mastery. Sergeant Hale approached her first. His voice wasn't commanding now. It was quiet, almost reverent. You knew how to do that?" Arya didn't answer at first. She simply set the rifle down on the sandbag wall, her hands lingering on the cold metal for a breath longer than necessary, like she was returning something that had belonged to another life. "I didn't want to," she finally said. Those words didn't land immediately. But once they did, no one spoke. The unit moved to assess the ridge, check for survivors, secure the high ground. Arya should have gone with them, for medical support, for after-action triage. But her legs didn't move. Instead, she stayed where she was, shoulders stiff, breath shallow, eyes unfocused. The camera, if it followed her, would move in slowly. Not to dramatize, but to witness. War doesn't just break bodies. It rearranges souls. She remembered being 16, lying in tall grass beside her grandfather's old hunting rifle. He had taught her how to slow her breathing by listening to her heartbeat, how to find the moment between each beat, the silence where a steady hand lives. She had never told anyone that memory. It had always been hers, a quiet memory of peace, nature, patience. Now it was something else. Now it was a weapon. Footsteps approached behind her, softer this time. Private Mason, the youngest in the unit, barely 20. He sat beside her on the sandbag wall, silent for a moment. Then he said, "If you didn't do that, we'd all be dead." Arya didn't look at him. There were other ways. He shook his head. Not today. But Arya's jaw tightened, because he was wrong. Not about survival, about the cost. There is always a cost. Before she could respond, the radio cracked to life. Urgent, sharp, tense. "Command to Outpost 3. Enemy convoy moving toward your location. Heavy transport. Possible reinforcements. Prepare defensive positions immediately." Hale's voice snapped back into command mode. "Everyone to stations! Move! Move!" Arya remained still for half a second longer, just long enough for one quiet realization to settle inside her. The 12 minutes had only been the beginning. The fog rolled in thicker now, swallowing the ridgeline like a great gray tide. The rain eased, but the air felt heavier, denser, as if the valley itself was holding its breath again. The radio transmission echoed in Arya's mind. Enemy reinforcements, heavy transport, approaching fast. If the snipers had been the scouts, the ones coming now would be the hammer. The unit scrambled into defensive positions, sandbags lifted, ammo belts dragged through mud. Hale paced with urgency, shouting orders that cut through the damp air. Machine gun emplacements were checked, firing lanes adjusted. Every man moved with that sharp-edged panic that comes after a miracle, the knowledge that survival had already come once and might not come again. Arya finally stood. The moment she rose to her feet, she felt the ache in her muscles, the kind of ache that only arrives after adrenaline leaves the body. Her hands trembled now. Not with fear, with exhaustion, with memory, with the weight of what she had done and what was still to come. Hale turned to her, not barking, not demanding, just speaking. "We need you on the wounded. If more hit, we're not going to have time for field surgery." Arya nodded, but something didn't sit right. She looked up toward the ridge she had cleared. 8 enemy rifles, 8 bodies, 8 vantage points, now empty. And beyond them, a road cut through the trees, the perfect approach path, the perfect choke point. "I'm going to the ridge," she said quietly. Hale froze. "Arya, no, we need you here. If they crest that slope with armor or heavy guns, you won't have wounded to treat," she said. "You'll have casualties to count." Hale opened his mouth, and then shut it, because she was right, again. She picked up the rifle, the same one, the one she hadn't wanted to touch. The metal felt even colder now, like it knew her, like it recognized the hands holding it. The climb back up the ridge was slower than before. Every step sunk into wet earth. Pine needles clung to her uniform. The forest around her smelled like rain, soil, and something metallic. The scent that follows fired rounds and spilled blood. At the crest, she lay prone once more, the valley stretching out below her like a bruise beneath the sky. She adjusted the scope. Her breath steadied itself, though her heart did not. Then she heard it. Engines. Low, heavy, approaching through the mist. Not one, not two, multiple. Headlights flickered and disappeared in the fog. Shadows of machines sliding along the road. And Arya realized something that made the world seem to hold still. These weren't reinforcements just passing through. They were coming specifically for this outpost, for her unit, maybe even for her. She steadied her rifle. The fog trembled with the growl of armored engines. This fight was far from over. The convoy emerged from the fog like ghosts made of steel. At first, only the sound reached her, the deep mechanical rumble of diesel engines pushing uphill. Then shapes began to form. The blunt silhouette of armored transports, canvas-covered troop carriers, a technical truck with a mounted heavy gun. This wasn't a patrol. It was a strike force. Arya steadied the rifle against her shoulder. Rain dripped from the bill of her cap, streaking across the scope and blurring the world into shifting silhouettes. She wiped the lens with the edge of her sleeve, slow, careful, not rushed. No movement wasted. Below, Hale shouted commands, his voice echoing through the outpost like gravel striking concrete. Men moved behind barriers and trenches, each one knowing they were seconds from another fight. The air buzzed, not with panic, but with a grim understanding of what came next. Arya exhaled. She lined her sights on the lead vehicle, just behind the windshield reinforcement. She wasn't aiming for the armor. She was aiming for the driver. The shot cracked. The truck veered, swerving sideways, and collided with the transport behind it. Metal slammed metal, soldiers shouted, the convoy jolted into chaos, momentum broken in a single breath. Below, Hale recognized the signal. "Open fire!" Machine guns roared to life. Tracers streaked the fog. The valley lit with muzzle flashes like flickers of lightning in a storm. Arya didn't look at the firefight below. She was hunting something else. She scanned the troop carriers as soldiers spilled out, taking positions along the road. They moved with discipline, well-trained, too coordinated for random fighters. This was a response force, a retaliation unit, The enemy knew about the ridge, and they had come prepared. Arya's scope landed on an officer stepping out of the third vehicle. No obvious rank patches, but the body language of someone in command. He was shouting orders, pointing uphill, pointing toward her position. She fired. The officer dropped. For a moment, the valley stalled. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Arya shifted to take advantage of the hesitation. That was when the first mortar round hit. The blast tore earth from the ridge 20 feet from where she lay. Dirt and rock rained over her helmet. She flattened herself against the ground, instinct and training merging into pure reaction. They weren't trying to outshoot her anymore. They were trying to erase her position entirely. Another mortar round landed. Closer. The forest shook. Birds scattered in dark flurries through smoke and rain. Hale's voice screamed over the radio. "Arya, fall back! They're targeting the ridge!" But she didn't move, because in the shifting fog, she saw something that froze